There is a place deep within the Appalachian Mountains where the trees grow taller, the shadows stretch longer, and the silence speaks louder than anywhere else. It's a place known only to a few, a place whispered about around campfires and in hushed tones among the locals. They call it the Forgotten Forest. I first heard about the Forgotten Forest from an old man named Harold, who lived on the outskirts of the small town of Pine Hollow. Harold was a recluse, a man whose eyes seemed to hold the weight of many lifetimes. He would sit on his porch, rocking slowly, muttering to himself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided to approach him. "Ever heard of the Forgotten Forest?" he asked before I could say a word. I nodded hesitantly. "I've heard some stories." "Stories?" he snorted, a bitter smile playing on his lips. "Stories don't do it justice. It's a place that consumes you, mind and soul. It's not just the forest that's forgotten. It makes you forget yourself." His words chilled me, but curiosity gnawed at me. As a journalist for a small-time magazine, I was always on the lookout for interesting tales. I convinced Harold to tell me more. "It's not just the trees that are old," he began. "The very ground seems ancient, cursed even. People who enter the Forgotten Forest don't come back the same, if they come back at all." Despite his warnings, I felt an inexplicable pull towards the forest. A week later, I packed my gear and set out to uncover the truth. The trailhead was easy enough to find, marked by an old, weather-beaten signpost that simply read, "Beware." The path was overgrown, barely discernible beneath the layers of fallen leaves and creeping vines. I pushed forward, the thick canopy above swallowing most of the daylight, casting the forest floor in perpetual twilight. Hours passed, but the deeper I ventured, the more disoriented I became. The trees seemed to shift, the landscape subtly rearranging itself when I wasn't looking. My compass spun wildly, and the GPS on my phone was useless. The first real sign of trouble was the silence. The usual sounds of the forest birds chirping, insects buzzing, the rustle of leaves were conspicuously absent. It was as if the forest had swallowed all noise, leaving behind an oppressive stillness that pressed down on me like a physical weight. As dusk approached, I stumbled upon an old cabin, its wooden frame half-rotted and covered in moss. The door creaked open, revealing an old woman with sunken eyes and a crooked smile. "Come in," she rasped, stepping aside to let me pass. Inside, the cabin was a cluttered mess of old furniture and dusty trinkets. The air was thick with the scent of decay. The woman gestured for me to sit at a rickety table, then busied herself with a kettle over the fire. "You shouldn't be here," she said without turning around. "I'm looking for the Forgotten Forest," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. She laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. "You found it. Or rather, it's found you." She set a cup of steaming tea in front of me, but I didn't touch it. "What do you mean?" "The forest is alive," she said, sitting across from me. "It has a will of its own, and it doesn't take kindly to intruders." Her words were interrupted by a sudden, bone-chilling wail from outside. I jumped, spilling the tea. The woman remained unfazed, her eyes fixed on me. "You have to leave," she said urgently. "Now, before it's too late." Fear clawed at my insides, but I managed to nod. I stood up and made for the door, but the woman grabbed my arm with surprising strength. I nodded again, pocketing the talisman, and hurried out of the cabin. The forest was now cloaked in darkness, the trees towering like silent sentinels. I fumbled for my flashlight and turned it on, the beam slicing through the gloom. For hours I wandered, the forest seeming to close in around me. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and I heard whispers, too faint to understand, but persistent enough to keep me on edge. The talisman grew warm in my pocket, a reassuring presence in the oppressive darkness. Eventually, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood an ancient stone circle, the stones worn smooth by time. A cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it the faintest sound of voices. As I approached the stones, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They spoke of lost souls and ancient curses, of a forest that fed on the minds of those who dared enter. I could feel the weight of their despair pressing down on me, threatening to crush my sanity. Desperate to escape, I held the talisman tightly and stepped into the circle. The air grew colder, the whispers more urgent. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, and I felt a dizzying sensation, as if the world were spinning out of control. Then, everything went black. When I awoke, I was lying on the ground at the edge of the forest. The first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon, and the sounds of the waking world slowly returned. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and the oppressive silence of the forgotten forest was gone. I stumbled to my feet, disoriented but relieved to be alive. The talisman was still clutched in my hand, its warmth now gone. I looked back at the forest, its dark depths still and silent. The memory of the whispers and the ancient stone circle lingered, a haunting reminder of the ordeal. I returned to Pine Hollow, where Harold was waiting on his porch, a knowing look in his eyes. Years have passed since that night, but the memories remain vivid. I've told my story to many, warning them of the dangers that lie within the forgotten forest. Some believe me, others don't, but I know the truth, and it haunts me to this day. The forest is still out there, waiting, watching. It's a place where the past lingers and the present is consumed. A place where those who enter may never return, and if they do, they're never the same. So, if you ever find yourself near Pine Hollow, heed the warnings and stay away from the forgotten forest. For it's not just a place of shadows and whispers, forever entwined with the ancient, malevolent will of the forest. And if you ever feel its call, resist it with all your might. For once you enter the forgotten forest, you may never find your way out. Despite my best efforts to warn others, curiosity often gets the better of them. Reports of missing hikers and strange occurrences in the forest continue to trickle in. They know better than anyone the true nature of the forest and the fate that awaits those who dare to venture too far. One summer, a group of college students arrived in Pine Hollow, drawn by the allure of the unknown. They were young, full of bravado and skepticism, dismissing the locals' warnings as mere folklore. They sought me out, hoping to glean more about the forgotten forest. I told them my story, emphasizing the dangers and urging them to stay away. But I could see the excitement in their eyes, the thrill of adventure overriding their common sense. They thanked me for my time and set off towards the forest, their laughter and chatter fading into the distance. Days passed, and the students did not return. Search parties were organized, but they found no trace of them. The forest had claimed them, as it had many others before. The townspeople whispered of their fate, adding their names to the growing list of the lost. The disappearance of the students reignited my own fears and memories. I began to experience vivid nightmares, reliving the night in the forest and the stone circle. The whispers returned, haunting my sleep and creeping into my waking thoughts. It was as if the forest had not finished with me, its dark influence reaching out from the shadows. Driven by a desperate need for answers, I decided to return to the forest one last time. Armed with the talisman and a resolve born of fear and determination, I set off towards the trailhead. The familiar signpost greeted me, its warning more ominous than ever. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the oppressive silence returned, along with the disorienting sense of being watched. The trees seemed to close in around me, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows in the dim light. I retraced my steps, guided by a mix of intuition and memory. Hours passed, and I found myself once again standing before the ancient stone circle. The air was cold, the whispers louder than before. I stepped into the circle, clutching the talisman tightly. The ground shifted beneath me, and the world spun once more. This time, however, I was prepared. I focused on the talisman, willing it to guide me. The whispers grew frantic, their urgency mingling with a sense of desperation. The darkness closed in, and I felt myself slipping away. When I awoke, I was lying on the ground at the edge of the forest, just as before. The first light of dawn was breaking, and the sounds of the waking world greeted me. But something was different. I felt a sense of clarity, As if a veil had been lifted, I stood up, the talisman cool in my hand. Looking back at the forest, I felt no fear, only a profound sense of understanding. The forest was not just a place of malevolence. It was a place of memory and sorrow, a place where the past lingered and the lost souls cried out for release. I returned to Pine Hollow, seeking out Harold once more. He listened as I recounted my experience, his eyes reflecting a mix of sadness and relief. Together, we performed a ritual of cleansing, a gesture of respect for the forest and the souls it held. The forgotten forest remains a place of mystery and danger, but it no longer holds the same power over me. I have made peace with my experience, using my knowledge to guide others and prevent them from succumbing to the forest call. The stories continue to be told, a blend of cautionary tales and local legend. And so, the forest endures, its ancient will ever present. It waits, patient and watchful, for those who dare to seek its secrets. But now, armed with the knowledge of its true nature, I can face the darkness without fear. For I am no longer just a survivor. I am a guardian of the forgotten forest's secrets, a keeper of its ancient memories. And as long as I live, I will ensure that its dark legacy is never forgotten.